if I could hope for but one thing for you, so you be curious in all that you do. 'Cause love, like a flower, just wants to grow. Oh, and knowledge, like your heart, just wants to be known. If you like, please subscribe. This is Bitcoin Study Sessions.
Hey, welcome. So Lucas and I are talking about the network state again today. So we're continuing on our discussion, Balaji Srinivasan's book, The Network State. We've hit the first two chapters. We're on the third chapter today. So I'll do what I usually do, give a quick summary, and then Lucas and I will dive into discussion. So to get us to the third chapter, chapter one gave us the general idea of even what is a network state. So to quote Balaji, the network state in one sentence: a network state is a highly aligned online community with the capacity for collective action that crowdfunds territory around the world and eventually gains diplomatic recognition. So this whole book is about that. That's the final iteration of the network state. Basically, the first chapter says if you want to form a new state, the most practical approach at this moment in time: cloud first, land second. Build in the internet, build online, create a community, and then materialize that community in the real world and finally gain sovereign status. Chapter 2 notes the importance of history in doing this. So if you're creating a network state, you need to have a group of highly aligned individuals. So you're going to align people highly around a common purpose, one commandment that is then substantiated by some form of history, by historical narrative that explains why your society has the moral purpose that it does. So, I mean, history is necessary because a startup society really begins as a critique of some aspect of an existing society. And history is what you use to describe an existing society, and then identify the flaws and formulate the critique that is your new startup society. History is also where you look as a sort of toolbox to find ways that you can build a better society. See what's been tried before, try different things. Chapter 3 then brings us to another framework for considering our present moment and where network states are going to fit in given the ideological winds that are blowing in three directions. We'll see. This chapter is called the Tripolar Moment. But let's step back from that. What is the unipolar moment? Balaji cites a journalist, Charles Krauthammer, writing shortly after the fall of the Soviet Union, stating that the world is now unipolar. There's one dominant power, the United States. However, nowadays, it's becoming more and more obvious we are no longer in a unipolar world. We're also not in a bipolar world. It's not US versus China, not East versus West. No, Balaji thinks that we are in a tripolar world. There are three poles. Each of these poles are networks that are upstream of states. These three different poles in the tripolar framework are, to give the acronyms, NYT, CCP, BTC. NYT, New York Times, that's upstream of the US establishment. CCP, that's the Chinese Communist Party, upstream of China. And BTC, Bitcoin, upstream of the rest of crypto and of the internet generally. Each of these three poles in this tripolar framework has its own source of truth and its own source of power. So the New York Times, the source of truth is obviously the New York Times. The source of truth is paper, what the paper says, or maybe you might say even mainstream media writ large, which promotes, Balaji says, a woke ideology. New York Times, its source of truth is the paper, the mainstream media. Its source of power is as moral power. Truth is in service of morality. For the New York Times, you can look at the headlines and see that there are moral premises and not factual reporting supporting the narrative that they've used to do their journalism. What does it mean to have moral power, to be a moral power like the New York Times? That means that you depend for your power on the moral lecture, on getting people to think things are good or evil, on censoring certain people, on canceling other people, on using perhaps a malleable idea of human rights to demonize other foreign powers in service of American empire. The commandment for the moral power that is the New York Times as the network upstream of the US establishment, its commandment is you must sympathize. What does that mean? Well, to quote Balaji, after all, aren't you white or male or straight or cis or abled or wealthy or member of one of an ever multiplying number of privileged categories and therefore an oppressor on some dimension? Because you're powerful, you must sympathize and bow your head to those you have ostensibly oppressed. So that's the first power, the New York Times, upstream of the US establishment, a moral power whose source of truth is the mainstream media. The second pole in this tripolar framework is CCP, Chinese Communist Party. It also has its own source of truth and also is an expression of a certain type of power. Its source of truth is the party. What the party says is true. The party is not the state, Balaji emphasizes. There are 95 million CCP members, Chinese Communist Party members, and it's a rather actually arduous process to become a member, and you have to even kind of dedicate yourself to certain future tasks of propagating the party message. Whenever the party emits a certain type of propaganda message, party members have to copy it down a certain number of times. They have to write essays in response to that. Why would anybody join the Chinese Communist Party? This is an LOL point for me, but Balaji says, quote, what people would choose to constantly post new essays regurgitating the latest in regime propaganda and indoctrinating their coworkers and family members? But it all fits if you think of them as China's New York Times subscribers. So the Chinese, the CCP is the party, is the source of truth. Well, the party is the source of truth for the CCP network as a pole of power in the tripolar framework. It also expresses a certain type of power. If the New York Times expressed a moral power, CCP expresses a martial power. Balaji notes under Xi Jinping, the CCP has turned towards militarist nationalism. It has real power to deploy in the real physical world, a huge manufacturing capacity, and it's making huge investments in things like drones and AI, which are obviously precursors, if not weapons themselves. The one commandment of the CCP, the one commandment of this pole in the tripolar framework is you must submit. You must submit to the party. You must be loyal, and you must do what the party says. You must submit. The third pole in this tripolar framework of NYT CCP is BTC, Bitcoin. Its source of truth is the protocol, and its expression of power is as a monetary power, as money. So a source of truth, what is written to the protocol in the blockchain and protected by proof of work, is true, or at least is verifiable in a certain sense. It's also, its source of truth is inherently decentralized and accessible to anybody and permissionless. Its expression of power is as money. And so that's obviously Bitcoin is a type of money. Less obvious, Balaji thinks, is that this monetary power is giving rise to a media power. Bitcoin leads to decentralized media. Bitcoin and kind of the internet that is downstream of Bitcoin. So once you have something like Bitcoin, a stable money, you can have prosperity. You can have uncensorable financing for whatever enterprise you want to do. And that gives people options, including to become their own media establishment, decentralized media on Twitter, on podcasts, things like that. If you can't censor somebody's way of receiving financing, they can do much more daring things. And if people have personal prosperity due to a stable money, they don't have to become a shill for the establishment. The one commandment of this pole in the tripolar framework, the one commandment of Bitcoin is you must be sovereign. So broadly, each of these poles is kind of framed up till now as distinct. NYT, CCP, BTC, NYT as a moral power, CCP as martial power, Bitcoin as monetary power. But these are actually, the truth is that Balaji says it's good to have moderation even within these poles, and that they are bad at the extremes. You really do need a moral power in society for some sort of unity between the people. You do need some sort of martial power to protect from chaos and disorder. And of course, you need money power to allow for self-sovereignty and for people to guide their futures. So this leads to Balaji's concluding concept for this chapter, the re-centralized center, where within a tripolar framework, which you can see as a triangle, you can move around within that triangle closer to two of the three poles, further away from one pole. People need to find for themselves where they situate in relation to these three different poles, which are types of networks, upstream of different things in society. Specifically, Balaji also, although he says you do have to situate yourself in relation to these three poles and each has something to commend of them, he does think that the future is located closer to the Bitcoin pole, in that people that feel some pull guiding their lives towards sovereignty are going to find some appeal in the Bitcoin network. And so even the people within the CCP or the NYT poles who feel some urge towards self-responsibility and self-reliance, sovereignty, are going to feel some pull towards Bitcoin. To quote Balaji, that is one of our premises is that the Indians, Israelis, American dissidents, Chinese liberals, tech founders, investors, and people from other countries that want to maintain their own sovereignty will need to avail themselves of BTC/Web3 for decentralized communication, transaction, and computation. So that gives us an idea of the tripolar framework. It also, of course, illustrates, or we hopefully helps us see how the network state as a phenomena is going to arise from some coordination, people choosing where they want to fall between these three poles, while being pulled towards Bitcoin and decentralization as a necessary precondition towards asserting their own sovereignty within a network state. So that's the summary. Lucas and I both read this, and Lucas did a really good job of going three-dimensional here. The network state is a book app, as Balaji calls it, and it's full of hyperlinks that become rabbit holes. The hyperlinks help substantiate points that Balaji is making, obviously. They serve the point of like endnotes. You can go directly to the source and see that what he is saying is true, or give some colorful anecdote that helps a person understand what he is saying. So Lucas definitely went through this reading and came up with and found some good metaphors and anecdotes from the notes. What do you think, Lucas? Is there anything that you think helps shed some light here from what you read?
Yeah. So first, great job on the summary here. So the tripolar moment, we have three competing ideologies, and those ideologies are not distinct from each other. They have overlap.
Yeah.
The BTC, the crypto capital people, they have, if you look at it from Jason Lowry's perspective, they have military power, even though they are the money power.
Mm-hmm.
They have media power because they have decentralized media, and so therefore we have, the biggest media in the world is Joe Rogan's podcast. That's the biggest media in the world, right? And that's very much, I would say, at least leaning in that direction. They're not all there, but then also the New York Times, they have that as well. They have their podcast. Clearly they don't. Clearly they don't resonate as much with the populace because the listening numbers, the participation numbers are not there.
And also, I just note on that. So we listened to the Curtis Yarvin interview for the New York Times podcast, and it's even just interesting to see how
Yep.
the New York Times as an ideology manifests in the way that the podcaster asks their questions with a sort of sneering superiority and then an assumption that the person they are talking to, because they are on the right, is somehow evil, and that what they have to almost prophylactically distance themselves from the person who's going to respond to the question, to note that I'm asking this person questions, but I'm still one of the good guys, because they have this whole idea of platforming and deplatforming. And so it's interesting to see that they're quote unquote decentralized. If they're entering the podcast sphere, they still are navigating it from their voice, their woke NYT US establishment voice or whatever.
Yeah, so something that I wrote about that, the submission, sympathy, sovereignty portion of this, which is the second, I believe it's the second part of this chapter, or second or third. The CCP is you must submit. You must submit. You silently imply powerlessness, and that's the secret handshake, which becomes the public handcuffs. It imprisons minds, and it lacks creativity. The New York Times is the sympathize,
Right. Yeah.
which is that you must apologize. You must publicly, and not so it's not silent now. You must loudly and publicly announce your privilege. You talked about this before. You have to profess your sins. Oh, I want, before I say anything, I must let you know that I have sinned in this manner. I have sinned because I am white. I have sinned because I am male. I have sinned because I am heterosexual. I have sinned because I'm able-bodied, right? I'm sinned because I am, what would it call, height advantaged or something like that. I'm over 6 feet tall, right? So
Yeah.
you have to line up all of your sins, and that is the price that you pay to get into the club. Getting into the club, though,
And that's like a price you pay to get into any moral club. Like if you're in AA, you have to profess your sins, right? You profess that you have a
yeah.
problem. If you're in the church, you have to confess your sins literally. So it's kind of like the nature of a moral power is you have to, note the black spots of your soul so they can proceed to be cleaned by the new baptism you're undergoing.
Yeah, but I think it's a little. I think it's different. I think it's different from AA in that when you profess your sins in AA, then like one of the things that you do is you talk about how you're powerless over, powerless over your addiction, and basically you're admitting that you're no better and no worse than anybody else. The NYT, the sympathize, the woke it's saying that I am better than other people,
Yeah.
but I am going to intentionally handicap myself so that you will recognize me as one of the good ones, right? Like that's always the kind of like derogatory term that people most often, I would say, associate with black Americans. Oh, one of the good ones, right? Or even now you'll see I experience people in the LGBTQ community that don't align with the very strong rainbow flag waving, etc. They distance themselves from that so that they can
Yeah.
say that they're one of the good ones, because you still implicitly recognize that there is something wrong with that. There's something wrong with ordering people in a hierarchy based on things that they do not control, supposedly that they do not control, right? Because what we're saying is that this is no different than your race, than your height, than your the money that you were born into. None of these things are choices, right? And so leave it at that. But yeah, so NYT, you have to sympathize. That's you're announcing, professing your sins. That's the shibboleth that is the cost of joining the victimhood. It imprisons people's hearts because it forces them to lack empathy for others while professing that they have sympathy. And then BTC is the sovereignty. You renounce the victimhood, which is the shibboleth that affords you entry into the based place. I tried tried to be fair here and say that the CCP that imprisons minds, the New York Times imprisons hearts, BTC doesn't necessarily imprison, it sort of sends the soul's wandering, where now you're untethered from that groupthink, but you do have to now find your own way, and it does. I would say it lacks sympathy. So I will recognize whatever that you have, whatever shibboleth that you want to say. However, I will not grant you special affordance for that.
Yeah. But there is an extreme to which the BTC as a pole goes to the extent that its one commandment is sovereignty.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, Balaji mentions that, extreme sovereignty means digging your own well, all that stuff. So no one wants to be a well digger.
That's Mad Max crazy.
Yeah.
I want to put up on the screen. Just so people see this, because I think he did such a fantastic job of it, which is the chart.
Can you zoom in there just a tad bit? That is a great chart.
Yes, I can. Hold on.
I mean, it's going to be tough to get it so you don't cut off the margins, but it's
right there. So, over here we have the communist capital, woke capital, and crypto capital. And each of these, one of the things that I wanted to explain was the Hirschman value. So the Hirschman value refers to a book that was written by Albert Hirschman, I believe is his name, Exit, Voice, and Loyalty. And I would really like to play this clip I found a dude who has I think he literally has one subscriber on YouTube, but he does a fantastic job of explaining.
Hi, everybody.
He does a fantastic job of explaining the game. So the game of exit, voice, and loyalty. And I'm going to go and start it right here at 34 seconds and cut it off at 1:52. Can you see that?
It was super loud the first time you started. Just make sure, I don't know how it's going to sound coming out, but tap down the volume a notch if it comes out super loud.
Okay. All right. Let's see how this goes.
It did play the first time.
What's that?
It's not playing right now, but it played.
Oh, it's not playing?
No, it began to play. Oh, there we go. Yeah, and now I see it.
Okay, share this tab instead. Okay, here we go.
So, in this exit, voice, loyalty game, we have two players. We have the citizen, marked by C, and we have the state, marked by S. We see that the citizen has a potential to move 2 times. There's 2 nodes there. The state only moves once. There's only 1 node here. And we know that we need to account for 2 possible strategies for the citizen. And we need to only account for 1 possible strategy for the state. Okay. So at the beginning of the game, the citizen has 3 options available to them. They can either choose to use their voice, they can choose to remain loyal, they can choose to exit. If the citizen chooses to use their voice, the state gets to move. And the state has 2 options available to them. They can either respond to the citizen's voice, or they can choose to ignore. And if the state chooses to ignore, the citizen gets to move. And if they do, the citizen gets to choose between loyalty and exit. Loyalty and exit. Okay?
Okay, so I'll cut it off there. But so what he's explaining here is that this is a game, and it goes in moves. The citizen has the first move. When you're oppressed by the state, you can do one of 3 things. You can voice your displeasure. If you voice your displeasure, then it's the state's turn to move. So once you say, hey, we don't like this, we want something different, then the state has the option. They can either respond to that and they can move in that direction, or they can ignore that and they can continue on the path of oppressing. I would say that right now, what we have seen in the United States is we've seen that voice become very loud, and now we're sitting at this node where the state is it appears that they're starting to respond. And as they are responding, I'm referring to Doge and what they are uncovering. As they're responding, what they're uncovering is that the state has, up until this point, been ignoring the voice. It has been intentionally doing things that were not voiced as part of the plan, I guess. And should that continue to be the case, should the state continue to ignore, then at that point the citizens have two choices again. So they can submit, this is the CCP route, loyalty, or they can exit. Now what he notes here is that exit, and these are arbitrary values, but they do serve a purpose. If you're keeping score, then the greatest gain is gained by exiting, because then that, if you don't exit and you voice, then that leaves you constantly at the mercy of the state as to whether they will respond or ignore. And then, of course, if you just simply stay loyal and you allow the state to do what it will, then you continuously become more and more oppressed. I just thought that was an interesting thing to share because, I mean, fascinating to find a guy with one YouTube subscriber that is doing something well. I like this. I like to highlight that. By the way, I'm gonna reshare this because I just saw something that's really important that I have to show. This right here looks like a butt, and I thought that we should talk about that. But
the parentheses here.
anyways, I think it's fantastic. That was the one thing on the exit, voice, and loyalty. Or sorry, on the chart here that I didn't really understand. The Hershey.
Yeah, and it's interesting that within, the woke capital emphasizes voice, but the kind of the purpose of woke capital is to ensure that we all speak with one voice.
Correct.
It's like woke capital is upstream of the voice. The New York Times, it kind of gives the marching orders to the mainstream media that then propagates them throughout the rest of the citizens. So you feel like you're exercising your voice, you feel like you're voting, but you've actually just been programmed with a historical narrative that has been pre-decided and, diffused by the centralized media. So, I mean, that's kind of one of the interesting aspects of it. It's kind of deceptive to say that, because like voice is often think of like democratic voice, make your differences known, whereas actually it's about monolithically uniting us under one voice that the state then continues to lurch along as it is and was and ever will be.
Yeah, to that point, yesterday I was listening to Mike Benz talk on Joe Rogan, and he was talking about one of the organizations that was funded by USAID that was a truth teller organization, and so they went to their website and they literally read off of their website, and it said like basically like since 2020, since COVID, we have identified over 19,000 different rumors about the like origin of the COVID virus and things about it, and we've suppressed those 19,000. So that like this is what they're proud of, right?
Yeah.
Is that we have don't worry, you don't need to think, because we've removed the options we've removed any options for you to think.
Yeah.
Here's your opinion, and we'll take care of all the all the sausage making of how you form an opinion using fact and using experience and stuff. So
Yeah. That's pretty terrifying. The idea is you should not be making a hypothesis yourself and attempting to see if the data is to support it. We will tell you what the hypothesis is and retroactively have already discovered all the evidence you will ever need to support that.
One thing that I thought was really fascinating here, I'm going to keep sharing, was one of the linked articles under the moral power, martial power, money power section, was this internal document from it was compiled for the Warren Commission. So this was a document compiled by United States Intelligence Services, and in the service of talking about did the United States or someone who killed Kennedy, right? So this was like a supplementary document that they added, and this is basically laying the groundwork for the idea that perhaps Kennedy could possibly have been assassinated by a foreign actor. And I thought this was fascinating. One thing, first off, they misspelled kidnapping, so it's kidnapping, and that's awesome. But so the Soviet State Security Service, the KGB, resorts to abduction and murder to combat what are considered to be actual or potential threats to the Soviet regime. Okay, yeah, pretty standard practice for a somewhat oppressive government. These techniques, frequently designated as executive action, they're known within the KGB as liquid affairs. I found that fascinating because these techniques in the United States, executive action is referred to as black ops. I think of an executive car. An executive car is always a black town car. An action is an operation. Those are synonyms as well. And also liquid affairs. What we refer to it in the United States it's called wet work. Liquid and wet, affairs and work. So
What's wet work specifically?
So wet work would refer to assassinations
By U.S. special ops and stuff like that.
Exactly, yeah, by U.S. special ops. So the terms, although they use slightly different words, they even have like the same type of derivation that you could walk them back to. That they come kind of full circle there. I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah, and I just watched Sicario, the second one. Not as great as the first one, but it's a representation of this when the executive wants to get something done but doesn't want their fingerprints on it. And so it's conducted by special ops and groups in cahoots with other special actors to operate outside the state, give plausible deniability, things like that.
One of the things that Mike Binns is fond of saying, and he repeated this a number of times during that Rogan interview, was that there's a saying within the community that if it's too dirty for CIA, then you turn to USAID.
I saw that clip.
Yeah, that's where. Yeah, he said it 4 times actually, and I think we're seeing more and more evidence of that. So. That took us down an interesting road. I had this question.
But also is a good illustration of how the moral power is connected to the martial power within the U.S. establishment, USAID being a way to launder U.S. ideas abroad and kind of foment dissension and things like that through ideological constructs, purporting to spread liberty, but really trying to, from within the inside of a country, work to cause instability. Often, I'm not all USAID things, but it is like morality and the martial aspect of a state often move hand in hand, right?
Yep. Here, another thing. So this is the sort of little triangle chart that Balaji has in the book, and it shows at the top the CCP is the authoritarian, the bottom is more libertarian. To the left and to the right, you've got the economic left, economic right. And then you've got the poles here, and he demonstrates how they, like, what sectors they fall into. And this is a question for you, but I don't know that there's a great answer, but we see that the New York Times and the woke capital is listed down here, and it's shown to be somewhat more libertarian leading than authoritarian. And I question if there's much veracity to that. The only thing I can think of is that the kind of the libertarian side of woke capital is, when I think about libertarian, what I think is I want to do what I want and I want you to do what you want. And I would say that the woke capital is the NYT side is just the first part of that, which is I want to do what I want. I also want you to do what I want. And so I could see how maybe you could maybe you could whitewash that. Pardon. Maybe
No,
you
I
could,
also,
yeah.
or go ahead.
Do you have any thoughts on that? Is
No,
there
when I saw this,
uh,
I spent some time trying to move myself around within this framework to see what would it mean to be situated here, close to the NYT, libertarian according to this model, and economically left. But I also didn't see that. I think that that's not, this isn't a helpful way to put it, to have authoritarian at the top and libertarian at the bottom, because in the last chapter regarding history, Balaji really helpfully split, like there's a bipolar aspect within the US left. There's left libertarians and left authoritarians. And I tend to think of NYT as more left authoritarian, with dissidents like Glenn Greenwald, who are kind of left libertarians,
that's a good way.
tending toward the BTC crypto capital, or maybe just like, yeah, I just don't think left and right. It's hard to graft those on here. And, objectively, the CCP maybe is like more authoritarian in its explicit controls over speech and movement association. The NYT, its authoritarianism is more a soft authoritarianism based on censorship, cancel culture, and deplatforming, things like that. But I don't know that it's not helpful for me to understand Balaji's idea, although maybe, I'm sure if he were here to describe it, it would make perfect sense.
Yeah, yeah. That's the one thing reading through this that I thought I could use some clarification on, because I didn't quite understand. Um, a quote from the reading is, "You don't want the New York Times run society where everyone has no recourse but to sympathize with the current thing, because that results in what Matt Iglesias has called the Great Awakening, the emotive and irrational breakdowns that set America on fire and continue to roil U.S. society." And I was unfamiliar with this meme.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
and
support the current thing.
yeah, so I wanted to put that up just in case
Yeah,
other people. So this is from knowyourmeme.com. I
yeah,
support the current thing. Um, to mock people who change their profile. And you think about this. These are the people that, oh, they've got a French flag. Oh, they've got an Israeli flag. They've got Black Lives Matter, Me Too, Occupy. That a constant a constant revolution of what is the current thing that I need to virtue signal. Um,
yeah.
and so this is what the meme looks like. I support the current thing. So if you see that, then obviously you can now know what we're talking
But
about.
it also, like, it's very comfortable to say the New York Times establishment and those that are downstream of its reporting have a support the current thing mentality. But as of 2 weeks ago, no, like there was an infinitesimal percentage of people on the right or left that had an opinion about USAID. And now
Right.
the dominant paradigm is, oh, irredeemable agency. Oh, this is all evil and corrupt. And, part of it is there's just reporting and new things come to light. But I think people need to be careful that, you know, there are narratives that appear from both sides, and to go fully on board with anyone at any time does put you in the I support the current thing, non-player character NPC meme. And so it's always like, be careful with that. If everybody's saying now USAID is total filth, maybe the truth, but really try to find the good faith commentators on both left and right and try to filter out what is a perspective that's valuable to have that makes you a PC, a player character rather than an NPC.
Yeah, I always think about things like that in terms of, I think about two cups, one cup filled with dirt and the other cup filled with milk.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got the cup filled with dirt, that's the dirty, awful. It doesn't really matter how much milk you put into it; you're still not going to drink it.
Yeah.
And then you've got, but the flip side is that you do have this, beautiful glass of milk that's pure and white and unsoiled, and then you put a little bit of dirt in it, and if you know that there's dirt in it, you don't want to drink that. And
Yeah.
to you it's dirty. It doesn't really matter how much. And so you can really put a stain on something. I'm not defending USAID at all. It does appear to me that USAID is very much a front and a cover for overt and covert foreign and domestic direct action and propaganda, and money laundering. That is what it appears. That's what it appears the objective function is, and I believe that there may have been some accidental benefit to a few people that could be considered generous or wise. But yeah, it does appear to be pretty wholly soiled. Yeah. So, anyways, yeah, moving past that. So one of the last thing of that quote, the last part of that quote from Balaji from the book was that you don't want the society. Also, you don't want the society where no one sympathizes.
Yeah.
Because that looks like the Grand Theft Auto environment of 1990s Russia, which is a low-trust post-communist society where any cooperative endeavor is regarded as a scam. And this link, 1990s Russia, it takes you to an article written in The Guardian from 2018 by Mark Galliotti. The title is Gangster's Paradise, How Organized Crime Took Over Russia. Under Vladimir Putin, gangsterism on the streets has given way to kleptocracy in the state. So this is looking post fall of the Soviet Union, and then the Wild West of the 90s in in Russia, and then Putin comes to power and restores order. I just want to read this, and then I've got a question for you. So this is an excerpt from that article. This guy was interviewing people during the 90s, interviewing a lot of I think he might have been a psychologist, I'm not sure. He was interviewing a lot of the people that were in the mafia. He says, one of the men I got to know during this time was Volodya. Wiry, intense, and morose, he had a brittle and dangerous quality that, on the whole, I would have crossed the road to avoid. I love that line. I would have crossed the road to avoid. He had been a marksman in the war. The other Afghanisti I knew tolerated Volodya, but never seemed comfortable with him nor with talking about him. He always had money to burn, at a time when most were eking out the most marginal of lives, living with their parents, juggling multiple jobs. It all made sense when I later learned that he had become what was known in Russian crime circles as a torpedo, a hitman. So this draws us back to Sicario, a hitman in the cartel, a torpedo in the mafia. Some of these guys are bodyguards, some runners, some leg breakers, and some were killers. That decade saw the emergence of a tradition of monumental memorialization, as fallen gangsters were buried with full Godfather-style pomp, with black limousines threading through paths lined with white carnations and tombs marked with huge headstones. And there's a link. There's another link to all of the. They refer to them as tacky burials, like headstones and stuff. To be honest, I think scratching pictures into granite is just a difficult thing to do. I don't think it's that tacky. It's very overdone, I would say. But the question I have for you are there similarities that we can draw between this over-the-top state funeral style of memorializing fallen soldiers turned hitmen that we saw in Russia with what we now see in Mexican, South American, Central American cartels? Are we? Is that just the modern version of that? And if so if that is true, that that's the modern version of it, then who are the other players? So who's the crumbling bureaucracy? And who is the great man? So is the crumbling bureaucracy the failed state apparatus that fell in upon its own weight? It was collapsed by corruption. Is that liberal democracy? Is that the United States? And then who is the great man rising to occasion? Previously it was Putin, and he restored authority through centralization. So now is it Trump who's restoring authority through decentralization? If it's not Trump, then who is it? Is it Bukele in El Salvador? Is it Milei in Argentina? Is it Elon in technology? Is it Satoshi in encryption? Is it Balaji in society? Is it Joe Rogan in culture? Kind of frame us, take us from what we know about the fall of the Soviet Union and what arose out of that, and then kind of compare and contrast, if you would, the modern world, and kind of lay the groundwork for, are we going in the same direction? Are we going in a different direction? Is this a remake where we just changed the script a little bit? Or is this something completely new? Is there any there? Or is it just that I'm drawing comparisons where there are none to be made?
So there's a lot of interesting questions embedded in that. I want to go back to the first part of the question. So this idea of gaudy state funerals or tacky state funerals, really showy maybe, within, as I understand it, a society that has disintegrated. Is that the point, that now they begin to have these really gaudy state funerals? So
I would just say, I would frame it as I think that the reason for this memorialization, for this state funeral type of thing, is that you have an illegitimate apparatus that's rising out of the falling legitimate apparatus. And one of the ways that it can help legitimize itself is to adopt some of the practices of the previous state enterprise, which is, we are going to make these people look as though they are fallen soldiers, fallen heroes, in order to sort of sell you on our legitimacy, I guess.
Yeah. I think it is the state funeral. The funerals that we give are for people who were soldiers for a cause, even retroactively defining them as soldiers for a cause rather than mercenaries or criminals or bandit groups, I think is done to encourage future loyalty for people around a new cause. So loyalty, I've often heard this said or read that loyalty is the first political virtue. And if you want to have people to advance your cause, you need to have a sort of unquestioning, to a degree, loyalty first and foremost. And so one of the ways you can do that is pick the people who did egregious things for the cause and define them as good. These are the revolutionaries that shed blood. And if you then define what they did as very good for the cause, you've redefined a new morality. People can advance the cause even through violence, or here are people who were on the vanguard of a new moral sentiment. I'm watching a documentary now. It's called Africa Addio. I think that's Italian for goodbye. And it's about how Africa changed after the British left, essentially. And part of that, in Kenya, after the British left, they freed this kind of bandit or revolutionary, depending how you want to define them, group called the Mau Maus, who were responsible for incredible violence against the British and against other blacks in Africa. But as soon as the British left, they then began to be valorized as kind of foot soldiers in the new movement. And I think that it's part of that idea of you look into history and you begin to tell a story that justifies the moral idea that you have. Certain, violent people become revolutionaries because they led to the creation of a new state. And so I think that state funerals, if they are gaudy in an attempt to really show that what could be perceived as a violent or bandit or mercenary group actually were, revolutionaries, ideologues, actually were people advancing society in some way. I don't know how. I love this article, Volodya, wiry and tense and morose. What a beautiful characterization. It sounds like some Dostoevsky character where he's kind of brooding and he has this complexity to him. And I think that in itself is kind of, a characterization of, people are not just one-dimensional constructs within any of these frameworks: loyalty, voice, exit, morality, money, or power. we're all agents within them that, maybe we're intense and morose in equal measure because we believe in what we're doing and yet are afflicted by a sadness or something because of what we have to do. I don't know. It's really interesting. It's tough to give a neat answer to all the interesting questions you pose because history is not neat. But I mean, that's the best. That's the best I can do. Is that it's all an attempt to rewrite history to justify the new state or society that people want to create.
One of the points that you hit on, one that I found really fascinating, was that the moral power. So the Soviet Union was the moral power. Today, the moral power is the New York Times. And being the moral power gives you license to be immoral, because if you are, this is kind of, I think, related to, the fall of religion, the rise of secularism and individualism, where, God is dead and now the individual is God. The individual is wholly self-determined, supposedly. So, if you are God and you have godlike qualities, then God does not sin, right? God, whatever God does is godlike. And therefore, if you do hold that moral power, then that justifies any means to whatever end. And so, all of the things that morally you will profess against are things that you will do in order to maintain your position of power. I think that's just kind of interesting how
Yeah.
being the moral authority leads you down a path of immorality.
If morality is superior to truth, then the ends will justify the means. And if you're not bound by any sort of platonic moral idea or ideal or real fact about the world, then you can advance any sort of abstract ideology to its bloody end very quickly, for sure.
So one of the other questions that I threw at you that I want to restate, because I do want to get your thoughts on this, or just to hear you spitball on it. But so the Fourth Turning, which is a book that I think quite a few people in this space now have become aware of. If not, they have probably heard some of the tropes and some of the recited lessons from the Fourth Turning.
And Balaji specifically mentions it in the previous chapter and ends with a discussion of it as one potential thesis for the way history is, along with the frontier and some other ideas about the directions of history.
Yeah, and in the Fourth Turning, they talk about during the, one of the things that is one of the things that you may expect to see during the Fourth Turning, which the Fourth Turning is the chaos before you basically rise back up. It's the winter before the spring. It's the death before the growth. One of the things that is mentioned as a strong possibility is that there will be a great man or great woman rising to the occasion during the crisis to restore authority. And so the example previously was that it was Putin rising out of the crumbling apparatus and the chaos of the mafia, rising to restore authority through centralizing power. And so if we are going through a fourth turning in the United States right now, and if there is power that needs to be, or if there's authority that needs to be restored, who is that great man? Is it Trump? If it's not Trump, is it, like, I'm just giving some examples, and maybe it could be someone else. So it could be Bukele in El Salvador, really kind of leading the way in a lot of different, very much centralizing power through authority, but also doing some decentralizing things. Malay as well in Argentina. Is it Elon Musk in technology? Is it Satoshi with the encryption, which is a power projection, which is, we would be like being the unassailable military power? Is it Balaji in society? Is it Joe Rogan in culture? Is it a combination of all of these things? Does this great man theory hold water in the current time that we're in? And kind of what do you think about that idea?
I mean, I wouldn't. So, as a way to think about history, the great man theory, as I understand it, is just that individuals can interject themselves into history and change the course of events, and that it's not all this, inevitable dialectic moving forward, bending toward justice in a very specific way, in which humans are kind of atoms and one is the same as the next.
I'm gonna cut you off just to reference what you just said, which is the what is it? The arc of history inevitably bends toward justice, which is a quote from Martin Luther King.
I think he left out inevitably, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the arc of history bends toward justice, which is something that Martin Luther King, an idea that he promoted, which is that look, the longer we're here, the closer we get towards justice. I don't know that that's necessarily true, but it's a beautiful sentiment, right?
Yeah, the arc of history constantly redefines justice to the current thing, I think is a more maybe cynical but more correct way to do it, to state that. But I think, just understanding the great man framework as that idea that a single person can stand in front of the wave of history and divert its path. I think you saw that in the centimeters head tilt that Trump engaged in that prevented the bullet from smashing through his skull. I think history would have been very different if that had happened. A great man is great, not just in the sense that their actions are great, but that history has, in some sense, forked, because of one person. It's not to say that Trump's going to be good or bad, great in that sense, but he's great certainly in that history is, I think, going to be very different for the fact of his having been and acted than it will if he had not done so. Again, whether that's good or bad is probably just to be TBD by which party wins and retroactively writes the history of Trump.
Yeah, I think if I was, going to Vegas and I was laying down $1,000 on who the great man of this era will be, I think I'd want to split my money. I don't know that I could make a bet. I think that I'd want to put, $500 on Trump and $300 on Elon and $200 on Satoshi. Or
Yeah.
maybe it's $1,000 on Satoshi. I don't know, because one of the things about Satoshi is that he is changing the world without being here.
Mm-hmm.
So that I think that I don't.
He or she, they or them. This is one of the few instances where pronouns are, very apt. Yeah.
But I think you're right to say that the head turn of Trump was a fork in history. If he doesn't move his head, he's dead. We are in an entirely different world. Biden, I think, was still running at that time. I think
Yes,
right.
he was.
Yeah. So
Yep.
we are very likely in a second Biden administration.
I think, I still think Vance could have pulled it off with Trump as a martyr, right?
Yeah.
But I still, even if that happens, the administration looks vastly different under Vance than it does under Trump. Like, Vance is undergoing a sort of apprenticeship right now, and there's just certain things that you will never get a president who's demanding the things of Panama and Greenland, changing the names of things. This is all sui generis Trump. This is not something that, even if you voted for Trump, you weren't ready for those things.
I saw somebody break down. They listed like 10 or 15 things that Trump had said that were just, off the wall, bombastic, over the top, and then they listed what the result of that was.
Right. No, for sure.
And they're like, look, you need to understand that this is he's very consistent in what he does, and this is a well proven, historically supported, not created by Trump. This is a negotiation strategy.
The art of the deal.
Yeah, and what it allows, it's actually gracious to the other side, because you say something insane like, "Oh, we're going to take over Gaza," and the other side is like, well, "Hold on, like, wait a second, like we didn't know that was on the table, right?"
Yeah, cut the baby in two.
Yeah, and it gives them cover
Yeah,
to settle for something that is still a concession, but much more palatable than the crazy thing. And
yeah,
so it makes them it really gives them space to negotiate, where
yeah,
there wasn't space before. Shane Gillis talks about this, clear back to when Trump was campaigning in the first election in 2015, 16, 15, yeah, where he's like, you get up and you've got this debate between 12, 15 different candidates or whatever, and they're all standing up there like they're in the model UN, and they're saying this, and he's just up there going, "Yeah, your wife's ugly. Yeah, you're fat. Yeah, you're stupid," or
yeah,
whatever. Like, we didn't know that you could do that shit. Like,
yeah.
he's like, "This is unfair." Like, it was just unfair to see this dude who was like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna play by my own rules," and just
Hmm.
mollywomp people with ridiculous statements. And so,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. He's a great man in that sense too. Just does things with a dynamic that's it's not of the institution that he is now part of. So
yeah.
he changes things. Yeah.
Um,
I
Go
I
ahead.
have a question too. Like, um, I'm glad we're double clicking and following these rabbit holes. There is one overarching question I wanted to ask. Maybe not overarching, but it kind of generally deals with the substance of the chapter that I found it very interesting. NYT, CCP, and BTC. Balaji in that diagram you put up notes that NYT state, CCP state, BTC network. But in the chapter, he does say these are actually all forms of networks that are in NYT upstream of the U.S. establishment, U.S. state, CCP upstream of the Chinese state. And this is because he says, as in the last chapter, we learned that the Leviathan, that force that is the ultimate source of power, the ultimate arbiter for a society, that Leviathan is changing. It was God. There was a point when everybody looked to God as the ultimate arbiter. Then it was state. There was a point when everybody looked to the nation state as the ultimate source of power. Now it is the network. Whether you believe in the U.S. state, you look to the network for power. The NYT mainstream establishment that has power over the state. Same thing with China. If you believe that China is powerful, you look at the CCP and not just China, the nation state. It is the network. This era is the era of networks as Leviathan. And it goes back, we read Matthew Pine's Global Power Competitions. It talks about, the nature of that competition is the competition for what network we're going to be a part of. Authoritarian techno-authoritarian stack, or kind of liberty-based one. And at the end of the day, you have to choose the network, choose what network you want to be a part of based on what you want to give dominion over your life. Morality, kind of the martial spirit, or the monetary network. And so we are entering the age of network as Leviathan. And the question is just, which network do you want to belong to?
I think what you just talked about really encompasses Balaji's thesis, which is that networks are above the state, that
Yeah.
they are inherently stronger than the state. They cannot be broken up like a state can be broken up. You can take down the borders, you can move the borders, you can bomb the capital, etc., etc. The state may die, but the network will live on. And so, in one way, I think this really supports the tripolar thesis of NYT, CCP, and BTC. In another way, where you mentioned, so NYT is network over state, CCP is network over state, Bitcoin is network over network. And so network over network trumps network over state. I would say, when I look at this, I think of it less as a tripolar moment, and I think of it more as the two bases, the CCP and the NYT, and arising out of that comes the third, which is replacing the both. It's the child. So this goes back to the, the one moral commandment, or the one commandment of the society, which is
Yeah.
that you have to have something. There has to be something wrong with what is currently existing for you to want to create something new, and you have to be able to elucidate that. You have to be able to say what that is.
Yeah.
And that's what I think BTC is doing. Is it's saying, the thing that is wrong with both of these models is that they don't allow for sovereignty. They don't allow for freedom. They don't allow for liberal democracy. In order to survive, those things have to quench and quell.
Yeah, but the NYT and CCP also say to the BTC, maxis are not correct. You do have to have a certain amount of loyalty, and you have to have a certain amount of morality, I guess, to unify people.
Yeah. Extremes are undesirable.
Yeah.
I think he said that very well. I want to move to another quote here, continuing on in this reading, this linked article about the fall of Russia and the chaos in the 1990s. So the quote: "During that time, murder was a depressingly common way of resolving business disputes. The notorious aluminum wars of the early 90s saw thugs occupying factories, a string of murders, and lurid accounts of organized crime activity across the metals industry. Recent research suggests that the contract killings related to those wars likely numbered in the thousands." So and then to go further, the racket has disappeared in its hard form, although there are kickbacks and raids. But now he's talking about Putin's Russia. Now business does not solve conflicts with the help of bandits and red-hot irons, but in the courts. Raiding, the seizure of assets and companies through physical or legal coercion, remains a serious problem, but it depends less on violence than it did in the past. One British businessman told me that he had had two separate occasions where he had to go back to Moscow because of attempts to steal his properties. On the first occasion, thugs appeared at the door and marched their way past the security guard. He had to call in favors, pay off local police in order to get them thrown out. The second time, the raiders came in through the front door in the form of lawyers and bailiffs with documents alleging that the property had been signed into their possession in order to discharge a non-existent debt. And so using lawfare in order to accomplish the means of the state, where previously violence had been used to accomplish the means of the mafia. So they so they are well aware that they appreciate a degree of predictability within the system, and also, now that they are rich, they appreciate a state apparatus dedicated to preserving property rights.
Who is they? Who is they in that?
This would be those benefiting the state apparatus, and the oligarchs that are associated with that, benefiting from the property rights that allow them to keep what they have stolen. But they are also well aware that an honest, well-functioning police force and a dedicated, incorruptible judiciary would be a serious threat to them. So they're kind of in this weird space where, as a result, they have a strong interest in preserving the current compromised status quo. So one of the things that I was trying to think about was, if the aluminum wars were kind of the kickoff for some big violence. And I looked up, I kind of queried ChatGPT. I was like, why was it aluminum? Like, what was the point? And aluminum at that time was a highly valued, scarce resource for defense, and for building weaponry, for building airplanes, for building, and so to control that really allowed you to control the defense of your assets. And so I wanted to know, what would the modern day equivalent of that be? Instead of aluminum wars, do we think of it now? Will it be the like Bitcoin hashing wars, energy domination wars? Will it be chip wars for AI? Will it be maybe rare earth minerals? Kind of where would you see that, or like when you look at the global landscape now and you see conflict arising over resources and assets that could lend themselves towards protecting, to be like a defensive or an offensive capability. What do you feel is the modern aluminum war? Is it Bitcoin? Is it chips? Is it rare earths? Is it something else? Is it all of those?
I think it's membership in a monetary network. So I think that what we're fighting over in all of these trade wars is the United States trying to slip out of the Triffin dilemma, being the issue of the global reserve currency, that we seem to be losing our industrial base, all of these things, trying to change the nature of the monetary network that the world is a part of so that we're not subject to that dilemma, while China also tries to change the nature of the monetary network to control it with a CBDC, central bank digital currency. I think all this conflict we see is downstream of the money, and what we're all fighting over is the perversities that arise from a fiat-based economic system, that it's not about a scarce resource anymore. It's about the lack of scarcity and the fact that it gives certain attributes to the monetary system when it's guided by a fiat currency. You need a global reserve currency issuer, and that issuer then is harmed in very specific ways, even as other aspects of that same society benefit. The financial class, real estate, insurance, fire, abbreviated as fire, those tend to benefit as the manufacturing base is lost. And so conflict arises due to, again, I think just the nature of our changing monetary network and what the future monetary network is going to look like.
So we're back to fix the money, fix the world.
Yeah.
Not fix, but for anyone who missed our previous conversation, explain the Triffin dilemma.
The Triffin dilemma, in its relevant sense, so I think it's George Triffin, an economist in the 60s, comes up with this idea. It is that if you are the global reserve currency issuer, you're going to have an exorbitant privilege of being able to print value, essentially, and people around the world are going to want what you printed. They're going to want those dollars that you can just print like monopoly money. And so you can send them that, and they will send you back real world goods in exchange for the pieces of paper that you're sending them. That's the exorbitant privilege. There's an exorbitant burden, though. The country that has that privilege of printing value and sending it throughout the world to get back real world products now has less internal incentive. It's more difficult internally to foster that manufacturing base that would allow you to make products yourself. So manufacturing then goes abroad, where people will work for less. It makes less economic sense to make those things in the United States or whoever issues a global reserve currency. So that's the Triffin dilemma. You have the ability to print value and get goods from around the world, but then that leads to the manufacturers of goods domestically to go to other countries. So you lose your industrial base, even as the financial sectors of the society that are benefiting from the printing of money closest to it tend to grow very, very rapidly. That's one explanation of the Triffin dilemma.
Yeah. So Triffin dilemma: if you have the ability to be the world's reserve currency, you will abuse that ability, and in abusing that ability, you will lose the world's reserve currency after losing your industrial capability.
And I don't even think that it's abuse, though. The dilemma is that the world needs dollars. Like liquidity is required to enable global trade, and so the world needs dollars, and so the reserve currency provider has to supply it with dollars.
But that goes again, so the concept that is somewhat hard to grasp is that any amount of money, so long as it is consistent, will serve a society, so long as it meets the characteristics of money. So it needs dollars. It does not need a ever increasing amount of dollars, right? It just needs dollars. So I see what you're saying.
I think, but increasing volumes of trade require increasing dollars because it's not like you can split up the cent into an infinity of
Well, that's why I'm saying
other cents. Yeah.
because it is not infinitely divisible,
Right. Yeah.
nearly infinitely divisible, like
Yes.
Bitcoin. That you have to go the other way. You have to go up,
Yeah.
which is why which is why we see the printing of $1 trillion notes in societies that have hyperinflated their currency because they are continually trying to go up, up the stack in order to make money, I guess more usable.
Yeah, but even then, I mean, that the Triffin dilemma is not implicated for those countries because they don't have the global reserve currency, so it's not a dynamic in other countries needing their currency. It's just internally they want to inflate and tax away and steal value from their own citizens.
Well, that's what we're doing too, and we just
Yeah, no,
we
definitely.
just got rid of the penny.
Yeah, yeah,
We're at,
yeah,
get rid of the penny, print $1,000 bill. That's probably the next thing, right?
yeah. No, but the only thing is, I just want to. I'm not saying that the U.S. financial system is not rife with abuse in every sort of way, but I think the Triffin dilemma is more agnostic in that even if you're trying not to abuse it, you're just stuck at the bad end of a certain dynamic that has to play out because the global reserve currency issuer stands in a special place in relation to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, hearing the Triffin dilemma explained to me makes it very obvious why you would, if you were the world's reserve currency, you would want to be making plans to not be the world's reserve currency because if you were able to learn from the lessons of history and see how that has hollowed out how
Yeah,
it hollowed out the British Empire, right? How it hollowed out it will eventually hollow out the Chinese Empire, I would assume, as they continue the Belt and Road Initiative. But yeah, I think that if you can learn from the lessons of history, then you would say that, oh, we are in this place of exorbitant privilege now, but we need to make plans because we don't want to be the ones left holding the bag after everyone else has left. And moved on to the new monetary network, which is obviously happening right now. So yeah, I think that was about all I had on that was about all I had on my little rabbit hole down the Russian mafia hole. One of the things that I wanted to bring up was, so how are things different this time? Well, one of the things that's different is that
different from what?
so in the previous tripolar moment,
Yeah,
which was Soviet Russia, Nazi Germany, and the USA, where the Soviets were the moral power, the Nazis were the martial power, the USA was the monetary power. What happened was that the moral power and the monetary power joined together to defeat the military power. There was an advantage during that time, and the advantage was that the combination of the moral and the monetary power outnumbered the martial power
yeah,
5 to 1. 350 million people against 70 million. What's different this time around is that the martial power, which is China, outnumbers the combined moral and money power by about 4 to 1. So instead of a 1 to 5 ratio, it's now 4 to 1. 1.3 billion Chinese against say 400 million combined with on the other side, and so quantity is a quality all its own. I believe that was Stalin. I'm not sure, but quantity is a quality all of its own, and so there is a cause for concern here, right? In that just because it played out in a certain direction the last time does not necessarily mean that it will play out in the same direction this time. And this time, I would say the authoritarian, like, yeah, you are seeing the split within the left, where you are seeing liberals distance themselves from woke capital NYT, that kind of thing, and the woke NYT that will align more with the authoritarian Chinese CCP, and the liberal side, that's the Glenn Greenwald side, will align a bit more probably with the sovereign BTC. But what do you have any thoughts on that, as far as the global landscape now that the teams are different, and there are a lot more players on the military power team, and they appear to have a substantial lead, in terms of both numbers and military power. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think some hope, just given the way that working within Balaji's framework, is the new Leviathan is the network. So these are all three expressions of a network. It's no longer nation state versus nation state. It's now different iterations, possibilities for a network versus other possibilities. And networks have less neat boundaries. They kind of, I think, sometimes connect to each other through certain nodes, and so bleed into each other in a certain way. I just think that there's hope there, because BTC decentralization can begin to clave off, draw off members of the other two poles in a way that maybe interconnects everybody. It becomes like a Kevin Bacon level of association. The networks begin to intertwine, where I have somebody who's less extreme than me as a friend, who has somebody who's less extreme even than that person. And so, like, BTC begins through network connections to connect to NYT and CCP. And there's a way in which maybe then that draws out a sort of aggressive militarism, and people are more interested in winning within the network, which is just a software idea that being part of the same network, broadly writ, makes us all want to compete within the network. And if there is a way to do that, like Bitcoin, that is non-kinetic, then maybe we don't need violent war to be the decider. If network is the Leviathan, then maybe non-kinetic warfare is like the arbiter of truth under it, in the form of like proof of work or encryption or something. I don't know.
Yeah, what Balaji says at the very end of this chapter speaks directly to what you're talking about here, which is, one of our premises is that Indians, Israelis, American dissidents, Chinese liberals, tech founders and investors, and people from other countries that want to maintain their sovereignty will need to avail themselves of Bitcoin Web3 for decentralized communication, transaction, and computation.
Yeah.
And so in the next chapter, he'll go on to explain why and how to frame that scenario and kind of what that looks like.
And is that next chapter, is that called the Recentralized Center? That's
the road to recentralization, I think.
Right, cool. So it must be like he ends with this idea of the Recentralized Center, trying to find the place within that triangle of poles, the three-polar system. You have to find a Recentralized Center. And so I guess, yeah, cool. The next chapter will bring us to that.
Yeah. So moves us down this path. I think a great job of laying the groundwork for understanding, as he states in the beginning of the chapter, it may not be that this model is correct. However, it is almost certainly usefully wrong, even if it is incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
In that it gives us a place to start from. Nothing is clearly defined. The monetary power does have martial power, it does have media power, it does have moral power.
Yeah.
The moral power has, each of them has components of the other, yet there is one thing that is expressed greatly,
right,
over the rest. And
yeah,
pulls us into a new discussion, I guess, of so if this is the premise, then what are the next steps that play
right
out? And that's what
Yeah.
we'll talk about next time.
Cool.
What else you got?
Yeah, that's all I had. I'm eager to see the re-centralized center. It's an interesting trajectory to start with. This book, we're going to talk about the network state, how to create a startup society, begin in the cloud, and then create a network state in real life. And then he's taken this foray through history and through ideology. And now we're getting to next chapter and the re-centralized center to see even more what a startup society founder needs to be conscious of as they triangulate the position of their network society, and and to be able to find people who want to join it.
Yeah. Again, it's a good read. It's fun. The hyperlinks are just utter joy, I think, in terms of someone who wants to dig deep into this and find some rabbit holes. I pulled out like 2 hyperlinks of, say 100 or 150. And if you're reading along with this, then definitely delve into it and start tracing your own path and finding your own commonalities and similarities that either prove or disprove what you believe, and adjust your thoughts. So moving on, we will cover chapter 4 next time.
Right on.
Right on. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you listen to, that's my brother, that's Christopher, please subscribe. It gets me one step closer to owning a cave, and that way I'll never have to mow a lawn or replace roof shingles ever again, which would be wonderful. Thanks.